Welcome to the Institute for Management Studies Leadership Conversations podcast, where we have leading thought leaders discussing their research and identifying ways that you can incorporate it to take your learning and development to the next level. Welcome, everyone, to this IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host, and also the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to highlight relevant research and practical applications from esteemed leadership experts and practitioners. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Eileen McDargh. Since 1980, she has helped organizations and individuals transform the life of their business and bring their business to life through conversations that matter and connections that count. She believes that resiliency is a critical leadership skill and one that requires the energy of connections. She draws upon her practical business know-how, her life's experiences, and years of consulting to major national and international organizations that have ranged from global pharmaceuticals to the U.S. Armed Forces, to healthcare associations and religious institutions. She's also the best-selling author of many books, and her latest book, which is going to be the topic of today's episode, is titled Burnout to Breakthrough: Building Resilience to Refuel, Recharge, and Reclaim What Matters. Thank you for joining me today, Eileen.
My pleasure.
So today's topic of focus is burnout and what we can do to overcome it. And I think a lot of people are experiencing this in today's economy with everything going on in the world. And I know that you have your definition of how you define it, and I'd love to hear that right now. And then we can further unpack it as we move forward.
Okay. Well, burnout is not a new term. In fact, it was given to us in the mid-70s by Dr. Herbert Freudenberger. Let me give you his definition, because I actually think it's a great encapsulation. And basically what he said, it is to deplete one's mental, emotional, physical energy by excessively striving to reach some unrealistic expectation imposed upon by yourself or society. And the baseline of that, it is exhaustion. But exhaustion can look differently. So exhaustion could be manifested by depression, anxiety, overdoing, underdoing, no longer feeling engaged in what it was that you were working, hearing people say, you lost your sense of humor. Getting up in the morning is horrible. And it might be hard to sleep. I mean, these are all some of the symptoms, but basically there's that notion of exhaustion. And what's interesting, Charles, is while that was given to us in the 70s, we really didn't pay much attention to it. And burnout has become, I hate to say, a global pandemic, but it really has. And it was so bad that in 2020, the World Health Organization finally declared it to be an occupational hazard. And that means looking across the world, saying, what is this thing called burnout? Now, I'm going to push back on the World Health Organization, because I don't think they went far enough. They also limited it to an occupational hazard. You can be unemployed and burned out. It might be that your work is what keeps you sane, and it's what everything else you're dealing around you in your personal life is what's lighting those flames. So when we do this, we really need to look at all of our life, not just the work piece, though we will start with the work piece.
No, I completely agree with you that burnout can take many forms and in many areas. And you're right. The World Health Organization didn't go far enough, because I know friends, family, associates that experience it in many different areas, right? So you look at three different dimensions that really characterize burnout. I was hoping that you could just give us kind of a broad overview, and I'd like to dive deeper into one of those today.
Well, the three dimensions is that I want us to move from, and that was the tagline, if you will, of my book, is going from burnout to breakthrough. Okay, so we got to get breakthrough in order to build resiliency so that we can refuel, recharge, and reclaim what matters. So the dimensions, if you will, is what the heck is going on now in my life? How do I begin to get some breakthrough ideas, breakthrough information, so that I can break out of a spiral, a pattern of work that does not feed me? And that's really what we want to do, is we want to say, stop. So when I think about those dimensions, it's looking at what's going on. How do I get that breakthrough? How do I look at all of my life, not just one part of it? And then what are the things that I can do to grow that skill? Notice I say skill, that skill of resiliency.
No, that's great. And I think what you just stated, right, if it first starts with a self-awareness. So because when people are burnt out, they're overwhelmed, they could be numb, they really can't identify certain areas that effectively of what's causing it. They just feel either numb to the entire experience, they are depressed, they're going down this spiraling down with anxiety, with depression. So what are some ways, or maybe some questions they could ask themselves so they are better aware of the areas that are really causing them to feel this?
Well, let me put it this way. Sometimes we don't know the questions to ask ourselves, but the people around us will ask the questions. So I think it's not only your internal introspection, but sometimes go, what do you mean? I'm not irritated. What do you mean I'm not sleeping enough? What do you mean I'm eating all the wrong things? So we want to do two things. One is that we need to allow what's our reflection that people are holding up to us. And then if I look in the mirror, Eileen, what are you really doing? And so some of the questions I think are related to what I think of as triggers. What is it that, if you think about a trigger, if I had one of those, those light sticks that you click like this and you light your candles, what are those triggers that light that? And so the first trigger is our own internal history. What are the voices that talk to us all the time? And we have voices. They can be voices of our parents, our grandparents, people that we appreciate, and they're talking to you all the time. And let me give you one of the voices that I realized it's been in my head. And the voice was that if I'm going to amount to anything, I have to work really hard. And it's how much money you bring in will tell the value of what you're worth. Well, it's taken me a long time to realize that's not my value. You're not going to put a dollar sign on that, but that's what pushes me. That's what gives me value. One of the first people that actually became my first case study for the book, Hamza Khan. He's a first generation man from India. And in his head were all of these, I'll call them demons, but they weren't. They were in his family that said, we depend upon you. You have to prove yourself. You have to do all this stuff. And Hamza's not the only one who would hear those voices. So one of the things is, what are the voices that you're listening to? And a great way to find this out is to write. Say, who am I talking to right now? And you can actually, it's a way of journaling. It's, you create a script. And so like I would say, Eileen, blah, 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 blah. And then let's say I'm talking about my dad. So what would dad say to me? And what does Eileen respond? It's a process. It's called intensive journaling. It was started by a guy back in New York. He's since dead, Ira Progoff. And it was a way of actually taking the voices out of your head and allowing them to create this script and saying, do I still want to listen to that voice? Is that still true?
Do you find a lot of the triggers come from childhood, from your experience, from your work? A lot of the areas in which people might get burned out, or how they've developed their sense of identity, like what you were just mentioning, right? With my sense of worth, or how I know I'm successful is based on the amount of money I'm making, or I mean, and you're tying that to your own value. From talking to other guests, it's a lot comes from childhood experiences, from the way things were modeled in your home, through your parents, through people of influence. Have you found that to be the case with you, or with that belief more specifically?
You know what? I couldn't say definitively. I've not done the exhaustive research on it. This would be from conversations with colleagues, with clients, that you hear that. Hamza's was the most, when I talked to him, was the most dramatic I'd ever heard. But it turned out that every one of the people who was a case study of my book, somehow in their behavior, the way in which they went into their lives, was a voice that said, this is a should, this is a must do. So I don't want to discount that. I think it's really, really important. But then we layer it with other triggers that are part of the world in which we operate. One of them is a technology trigger, that we are surrounded by all of this technology that says now, 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 now. I mean, think how many times we are interrupted. You sit there, you're trying to do work, and ding, here comes an email, and ding, here's the text message, and ding over here. So our ability to focus, our ability, our energy, which is very important, gets scattered because I'm answering all of this technology. Now, I don't know whether they still do this, but at some point in time, Boston Consulting said to its staff, on the weekend, you are not to answer email. You are not to send email unless it is absolutely critical. They literally had to make a practice, a corporate practice, because people were, instead of coming back down, they were working, which Charles brings up another point. Because of the pandemic, because so many people are worked at home, and I have a feeling we're still going to be working at home, we actually work more.
I would completely agree with you. There's a pandemic of just overwork and not having clear boundaries anymore as far as when I'm working, when I'm not working. And you're right. It's much easier to differentiate the causes of burnout if you can identify those triggers. But like you were saying, the layer upon layer of current triggers adding to the triggers that you've experienced earlier in your life, that it's so hard to differentiate, to distinguish, to really sort those out. But that's still that to stop, look, and listen is that first step. So you get those aha, so you become more aware of what's causing it. Because if you don't know what's causing it, you can't fix it. You're only dealing with the symptoms, correct?
Right. That's right. And so when we do this program on the longer version, we're going to look at those 5 triggers. I've just given you just really 2 of them. We will look at that because I think, like you said, unless I understand what's lighting that flame, I don't know how to control it. Now, notice I said control it. I didn't say get rid of it. Reason I say that is I'm not going to get rid of technology, but how do I control it rather than having it control me? So once I understand those things, then I say, so what are the actions that I'll take? The other thing to be very honest, we also have to look at what is it, the environment that we're surrounding ourselves with, and where are things that are happening organizational. In this case, now I'm going to move away from personal for a second. Organizationally, what are some of the organizational things that are triggers? And I think, with all good intentions, some of those organizational triggers, we need to step back and say, whoa, why am I asking people? Why am I holding 27 Zoom calls in the space of a day? Where is it that I, as a manager, am ignoring what it is that my people need? I'm just do. And there's some people in management positions, frankly, that are unaware that they're a major trigger for the team that they have around them.
Well, that's a great point, that they need to have that self-awareness. And I love moving that into the organizational piece, because you're right. Getting back to what you said earlier, you can't extinguish it, especially not at an organizational level, but you can be able to manage it, because there's some triggers you have control over and would make the people that you work for or people that work under you a little bit more appreciative if you can control those. But there's some things that are dictated down from the top that are just needed to be managed, right? You can't eliminate them. So how do you manage those more effectively? And I think having that self-awareness, taking time to stop, look, and listen, extensive journaling is all things that would help to really clarify what's causing it. And now moving forward, how can you better deal with it, right? So once you've found that aha, now you're saying, okay, where are the areas for a breakthrough so that I can build some mindsets, I can build some skill sets that would effectively have me manage these better over time. And you identify that resilience is really a muscle, right? That needs to be strengthened over time. It's not something you can turn on like a flip of a switch.
Right. So if you think about going to the gym, if you've never gone to the gym, you're not going to walk in and lift up 150 pounds. You're going to start with 10. And resiliency is like that. The good news is that we know that resiliency is not genetic. It can be developed. But like anything, it takes patience, practice, and persistence. Those three things: patience, practice, and persistence. And I think we also need to step back, Charles, and say, and what is the context of my life right now? So one of the things that we look at is this notion of, we hear people talk about balance. Well, I got to get all these things in balance. And as you and I know in our previous conversations, that balance is stupid. It doesn't exist. It implies that everything's going to be equal. Well, it's not going to be equal. So given where I am right now in my life, how do we, like you said, stop, look, and listen, step back and say, oh, what are the important things now that I need to take care of? A year from now, they might not be here, but I need to understand that because I am navigating the journey of my life.
No, you're right. And balance, I love that, the myth of balance, and what you and I have talked about before, that no one ever is in complete balance in every area. You can get out of balance for certain periods of time because certain things require more attention, higher priority. And like you said, it might be a different season of your life coming up in which those no longer have the priority or take the time. But what I would push back on to say is that, yes, we're always out of balance, but we can't be too far out of balance for any extended period of time, that at some point, the scales need to correct themselves so that we don't focus too much on one area for too long. Would you agree?
Yes, and yes, and my idea, first off, I'd get rid of the word balance because I just don't want to use it. And because balance sets up this image in my head, Charles, of a scale of justice.
Right.
Okay. So I'm going to give us a different metaphor. And if a picture's worth 1,000 words, a metaphor is worth 1,000 pictures. And the metaphor I want to use is to think of a sailboat, an individual sailboat. And if you're in a sailboat, there are 5 parts of every sailboat. We all have the same 5 parts in this sailboat called our life. It's just, depending on the context, it will be different. So there is the intellectual part, which is the sail. If you look at a boat, like right now, I live in Southern California, and I'm looking out at the ocean. The biggest part of that boat is going to be the sail. Well, the intellectual part, from my vision, is all of the things that we call work, job, whatever you want to call it. What's that phase of my life? And that's the first part. Then another part of my life is the physical, and that's the physical tiller. Where is my body right now? What is it that my body's requiring of me? And it's going to be different if I'm fighting stage 2 cancer versus I just need to go to the gym. So there's the intellectual, the physical, the emotional. I think of this as the centerboard. And the centerboard is what keeps a little sailboat, an individual, one-person sailboat, on an even keel. So emotionally, who do you need to pay attention to right now? It's one thing if you're a newborn. You got your mom of a newborn. It's another thing if you're caring for an aging parent. So I always say, who sits in your sailboat with you? And who do you need to pay attention to? And then there is the material, which is what the little boat looks like, because you and I make choices to support a material lifestyle. And sometimes some of those choices we're feeding with our soul. And the last part, which is at the bottom of that physical tiller, is this little rudder, and that's the spiritual, however you define that to be. So if I think of sailing, my notion then is, how am I connected, i.e. there's the word connections. How am I spending time? That's the only commodity I have with those different parts. And it's sometimes one of those will require more time, more attention, more connection than another. It's when I abandon any of those 5 things, now I'm out of my sailboat. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's a great metaphor to use. One question that I would have is, you have these 5 things then, and now if you abandon them, can you abandon 1 or 2 of them for a period of time? To say you have this new promotion in this new company, and it requires a ton of time and effort, right? That you're not able to devote to the people in your boat. How far are you able to focus on that one area? Or should it always be where you're always mindful? You always have to keep some sense of stability, have all those 5 pieces in the boat at one time, because otherwise the sailboat wouldn't function, right? If we're using that metaphor, that it has to be in the boat. So for it to be in the boat, there has to be some time focused on it at any period of time. Because if pieces aren't there, if it's rudderless, if there's no material for the boat, if the sail has holes in it, you're really fighting an uphill battle.
That's true. So here's my response to that. I got a big promotion. I'm going to spend a lot of time. I got to learn. I have a whole new, series of people that I have to learn that I'm now going to be responsible for. I've got some key performance indicators and KPIs I got to do. Where I will get in trouble is if I ignore the other parts. Now, notice I said ignore. So if I'm going to be a good, effective person in that promotion, I am going to have to take time out for my physical well-being. I got to learn to set boundaries. I don't want to lose my marriage. I might not be able to spend as much time with my best beloved, but whatever time I have, it needs to be there. And so I might say, I'm not going to have dinner with you every night, but let's have one special date night. So what this is instead of living our lives in response, we live them consciously, not unconsciously. So what we say, okay, so if I got this promotion, what is it going to mean to us? And where will I make some of these adjustments? What do you think?
No, that's great. I think that's the right perspective to have on it, and to make sure that you're consciously making these and you're involving the other people in the decision as well, right? So they feel part of it. They know that this is going to be maybe temporary, but we're going to still have quality experiences despite them maybe not being as frequent.
Right. And it's when we touch base, if you will, if I'm in my sailboat, I don't want to I'm not going to abandon my kids over here, but might look differently. Maybe what we'll do is the kids and I will go to the park and I'll exercise and play with them. I'm helping my physical body. I'm staying connected to the kids over here. But now I know that when I come back, I'm going to have to file this report. And by the way, I teach what I need to learn. There are some times, Charles, I'm good at this, and other times I stink. And my husband says, read your book, Eileen. I hate it when he says that. But it's, because life is a journey. And if you think about a sailboat never goes from point A to point B directly. It moves. It has to go with the wind. And the wind comes up in our life all the time. And so that also means is that course correction, there could be a big piece of wind that comes up that all of a sudden, like a shift, like a change.
Well, and that's important. And I think that's something worth diving a little bit deeper into, is that when you do fall off the wagon, when you don't do what you preach, instead of just discontinuing it, how do you get back up? How do you motivate yourself? How do you have that resilience to say, you know what, I failed this time, but I'm still committed. I still want these areas that are important to me to have these quality experiences, to not suffer. So how do you get them back on the wagon sooner rather than later?
Well, I think we should look at that notion of resilience. So first off, let me just define it. Resilience is not about bouncing back. So I'm going to push on that one. It's about growing through. And ultimately, at the end of the day, resiliency is about energy management. Do I have the mental, emotional, physical energy to grow through? So resiliency is about learning and growing. And there are 4 resiliency skills: adaptability, agility, laughability, and alignment. And what adaptability is, this is where we talk at ourselves. So when you said, I failed at this, stop and say, how many different ways can I respond? Because adaptability is requisite variety, finding multiple ways to respond to something. Are there other ways that I could respond? So maybe I didn't fail. This is what I learned. That's a big difference in what I failed. What did I learn?
You learn a whole lot more from your failures than you do your successes. And I think that is the right perspective to have on failure.
Yeah.
is that if you're not failing enough, you're not learning what you need to learn, because no one goes through life with a string of successes. And in fact, I read this one from this one source, or this one educator that I was talking to, that it can be actually detrimental to younger people if they have this string of successes and they've never experienced failure, because when they do, they're not going to be equipped to handle it and to be resilient around it and through it, so that it hurts them more than it actually helps them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the questions, in organizational life. Instead of saying, well, we screwed up and we didn't make those numbers, say, this is fascinating. So what did we learn by this? Instead of saying this is terrible and this problem solve, what Cooper Ryder came up with was this notion about, if this is going to work, or we've seen this work in the past, what did we learn? What needs to be so that we can say, what are the parameters that will allow us to grow forward, not with a solve the problem. No, let's figure out, if all things, what are the things that should be, maybe we need to change something over here. Maybe we got the wrong person doing this. Maybe we're making everybody come into this meeting, and the truth of the matter is only 3 people that need to be in that meeting, which also means I'm taking time and energy from other people that didn't have to be there. And organizationally, I just lit another match.
No, that's very true. Having that post-mortem is so critical, even having a pre-mortem to identify what could go wrong. Let's look at those so we're better equipped and adaptable to handle those when and if they happen, so that we can pivot more quickly and learn from our mistakes.
Well, that's what scenario planning is. Scenario planning was where you would step back and say, what are all the potential downsides? And now we know what they are, put it away, but we have something that we could look at. And as a parallel to that would be this notion of appreciative inquiry. And if everything were, well, what needs to be in place for this to get the response? And I think one of the things that we see also now in this world of constant change is that I don't want to think too far out. 5 and 10 years, I have no clue. Maybe what we need to do is say, what do we need for 1 year? Maybe even 2 months. Let's get through the 2 months and then see where we are.
Well, don't you think that's one of the biggest causes of burnout? When you try to look too far out and there's so much uncertainty, or when you try to tackle a huge project and you're not breaking it down into smaller increments, whether it's your calendar, your schedule, or a project, it becomes overwhelming. You don't know where to start, which I would assume contributes to you feeling more and more burned out and not even knowing where to begin.
I think that's a great point. One of the things is that you start with the low-hanging fruit. What are the things that I could check off? And there are different things that people do to be able to feel, successful. Okay, I got that. But oftentimes, if I look, and I am a writer, so I look down at, I have my day timer here, and even though it can be here in my little old phone, I like to see it here. I like to cross it off. But I realized a number of years ago that I put too much on that piece of paper. And that, what are the things at the end of the day are really important? And by the way, on that piece of paper, what is it that I need to do for self-care? And that's an important part of resiliency, is self-care. What are the places in which I need to say, I'm not taking care of myself? And let me say this very strongly. Well leaders lead well.
That's a great statement. And I definitely support that many people just are out of balance, especially with their physical health, right? And trying to identify and keep that in mind as you're making it. And really one of the overarching themes of this episode is that self-awareness, doing things in a deliberate manner, making sure that you're consciously making these decisions, because so much of everyone's life, it seems, is through autopilot.
Yeah.
They're not in the present moment making these conscious decisions. It's being run on autopilot, and before they know it, their health is bad, they're burnt out, their relationships have suffered, and they're left to ask why. And then it's a daunting task, and it's much harder to get back in the right frame of mind down the right path when you've allowed it to go so long on autopilot before you step back and looked and listened and had those aha moments.
Yeah, that's so powerful what you said. A number of years ago, I have developed a practice. And my practice is, first off, at the end of every month. So here we are right now, we're moving, halfway through March. At the end of March, I have this little, it's on my computer. It says, what did I do intellectually, physically? I keep track of my exercise. I keep track of how much water. How did I do on sleep? I have, in my case, it's a Fitbit and it monitors how much sleep because I realize I'm not sleeping enough. You can't do good, well, leaders lead well. And if you're not getting enough sleep, it ends up, you become short tempered. Your brain doesn't work. I mean, the whole thing about our brain. Anyway, so at the end of a month, I have, so it says intellectually, emotionally, physically, spiritually, what did I do? And under intellectual, I also have how many books did I read? Who are the people that I connected with? And I print that out and I keep it in a journal. And I can go back. And so at the end of a year, Charles, where most of the time I used to say, where did the year go? Now I have 12 pages. I go, oh, wow. No wonder that's where it went. We even forget that stuff. So it allows me to stay focused, as you said, in the now. What's here now?
I think that's so important. If you want to improve any area of your life, it first starts by tracking it. You want to know why you're not in better shape? Track it for the month. You can see how your diet is going, how much you're exercising, sleep-wise. I advocate that so strongly with people that I speak to as well. And I've heard that from many others, that you got to get better at tracking it, because then you can better then use that time more appropriately. Many people feel like they don't have enough time in the day, but if they were to track their weeks for a couple of weeks, they would find a lot of time in which maybe they're on social media, maybe they're doing things that are not productive, and even reallocating some of that time would really amplify their impact in those critical areas in which they want to improve.
It's just so true. I mean, I just want to underscore, highlight it, neon lights, whatever we want to say with that. But that's really, because I don't know where this precious thing called my life goes. Now, remember, tracking doesn't, sometimes we say, well, that means how productive was I? Maybe one of the things you want to track is, were you quiet by yourself? Did you sit alone for 10 minutes? There's great power in mindfulness. Harvard teaches mindfulness. John Kabat-Zinn, up at Harvard is to be quiet, still your brain. That's as important as moving your body, as signing that major contract with a new client. That allows me to show up. Then I can stop, look, listen.
I love it. It was always a pleasure talking to you, Eileen. As we reach the end of today's episode, I'd like to end it with a call to action. So is there one thing that you would recommend, one tip you can provide our listeners if they wanted, maybe around the self-awareness space, the stop, look, and listen, that they could use tomorrow to be more intentional, to be more in the present, and to identify some of these areas in which they may be feeling some burnout?
Okay, here's the one action that I would suggest that they take. Yes, and start it today. If they're listening to this podcast, they're looking at the video cast today, write down, I call it a CAT scan. Check what claims your time. Assess why and how, and is it of value, and the T is to take action. I will guarantee you right now, everyone listening to this, we really don't know where that time goes. So just for one day, 2 days, just say, okay, when I suddenly change activity, what did I do? Just write it, write it in a journal, write it on your day timer, write it, whatever. And at the end of even that day, you're going to see, oh, look how I was pulled away to answer this email. Look what I did here. And then you say, why, how, and is it of value?
I love that. CAT scan, love it. Why, how, and is it of value? Be more intentional. I think that's a great way to end it. Eileen, remind our listeners how they can reach out to you and get in contact with you.
Well, if they can spell my name, they can find me. To my knowledge, ever since my grandmother died, I'm the only Eileen McDargh on the planet. So they can Google me, they can go to my website. You can write me, Eileen at eileenmcdargh.com. And I know my name is going to be up there. You can find my books on Amazon. You can find them on our website. So I'm really easy to track down and I'm really good to talk to.
Well, thank you, Eileen. And this concludes this episode of the IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. You can send us your feedback at info@ims-online.com. If you'd like to subscribe, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple or Spotify. And it can also be accessed on our website at ims-online.com. And until next time, remember, it's not what you know, but what you do consistently that makes a difference. Thank you.